Teen mom delivers a baby that can breathe fire. How is this even possible? To find out, watch the video to the end. But first, please subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications to get more stories like this. Emily's screams ripped through the sterile hospital walls, echoing down the corridor. Her fingers clawed at the bedsheets, knuckles white, her body drenched in sweat. She had imagined this moment so many times. Giving birth at just 16 was already terrifying enough, but nothing could have prepared her for the agony tearing through her. It wasn't just pain, it was something else, something unnatural. Her mother, Sandra, stood at the bedside, gripping Emily's hand tightly. "You're almost there, baby, almost there," she whispered, but her voice wavered. The doctors and nurses were moving too fast, their hushed whispers laced with tension. Emily could barely make out their faces through the blinding overhead lights, but she caught snippets of their frantic conversation. "Her temperature is over 104 degrees, a nurse muttered, glancing at the beeping monitor. "I've never seen a reading like this before," another responded. "The baby's heart rate is, oh my God." Emily gasped, her back arching violently as another contraction seized her. It felt like her insides were on fire. Her vision blurred. It was too much. She wanted to scream, to tell them that something was wrong, but the words stuck in her throat. Then, as if the entire room had frozen in time, she heard it. A cry. But it wasn't just any newborn cry. It came with a crackling, burning sound, like the roar of a distant flame. Emily's breathing was ragged as she forced herself to look down. The doctors had gone still. The delivery room, once a storm of motion and urgency, now lay in stunned silence. The lead doctor held the newborn in his gloved hands, his face frozen in sheer disbelief. Emily could barely make out the small, writhing body covered in the usual fluids of birth, but then, a flicker of orange, a tiny glow coming from the baby's open mouth, and then, a burst of flame. A jet of fire erupted from the baby's lips, blasting toward the doctor's hands. He jerked back with a startled yelp, dropping the baby onto the hospital bed. The newborn landed with a soft thud, squirming, but otherwise unharmed. Emily screamed, reaching for her child instinctively, ignoring the terror in the doctor's eyes. One of the nurses backed up so quickly that she tripped, crashing into a tray of medical instruments. A scalpel clattered to the floor. Another nurse, her face pale, fumbled for the emergency intercom. Code red in maternity. We need... She didn't finish her sentence. The baby let out another high-pitched wail, and this time, a swirl of embers flared from his tiny mouth. The oxygen in the air around them hissed and burned, making the room feel hotter by the second. Sandra pressed a hand to her mouth, eyes darting from Emily to the child. "Oh my God," she whispered. "What is happening?" Emily didn't care. She reached out and grabbed her baby, cradling him in her arms. His skin was warm, hot even, but not burning her. He was so small, his little fists clenched, his body trembling. His eyes, barely open, glowed faintly, as if there was a fire smoldering beneath his irises. "He's just a baby," Emily whispered, rocking him gently, trying to calm both herself and him. But the hospital staff didn't see a baby. They saw something else. The lead doctor, a man in his 40s with shaking hands, finally found his voice. "We need to contain this," he said, glancing at the nurses. "Alert security. Call the emergency containment team." Emily's heart stopped. "Contain," she echoed. "What do you mean contain?" "He's my son." The doctor didn't look at her. He was already backing away, pressing the emergency button on the wall. The red alarm lights flashed, casting the room in an eerie glow. Outside the delivery room, heavy footsteps echoed down the hall. Emily could hear voices, deep, authoritative, urgent. Move. Lock down the floor. No one gets in or out." Terror gripped Emily's throat. They were coming for her baby. Sandra saw it too. She turned to Emily, gripping her daughter's shoulders. "Emily, listen to me," she said, voice low and urgent. "You have to hold him tight. No matter what happens, do not let them take him." Emily clutched her newborn to her chest, her mind racing. She had just given birth minutes ago, and now they wanted to take her child away? The doors burst open. A group of men in dark suits and medical masks entered. They weren't regular hospital staff. One of them, a tall man with cold, assessing eyes, stepped forward. He spoke, his voice calm yet chilling. "Miss Carter, I need you to hand over the infant." Emily tightened her grip on her baby. "No." The man sighed as if he had expected this. "Miss Carter," he repeated, "you don't understand. That child is dangerous. We need to remove him from this environment immediately. He's my son." Emily's voice cracked. "You can't just take him from me." The man's gaze flickered to Sandra, then back to Emily. "This isn't a choice," he said simply. And then, the baby let out another cry. This time, the fire that erupted from his mouth was stronger, hotter, wilder. It didn't just flare in the air, it ignited. A burst of flames shot toward the man, forcing him to jump back. The fire licked at the walls, setting the corner of the room ablaze. Screams erupted as the hospital staff scattered. The men in suits cursed, grabbing for extinguishers. But the fire didn't behave normally, it moved like it was alive, curling toward those who tried to contain it. Sandra grabbed Emily's arm. "We have to get out of here." Emily, clutching her newborn close, turned toward the door, toward the only escape. But standing in the doorway was a man she didn't recognize. He wasn't dressed like the others. He wasn't in a hospital uniform or a suit. He wore a long black coat, his face partially obscured by shadows. But when he spoke, it was calm, assured, and laced with something terrifying. "Emily Carter," he murmured, eyes locking onto hers. "You don't know what you've just given birth to, do you?" Emily felt her breath hitch. Who was he? And more importantly, what did he know about her baby? The alarms blared louder, the fire crackled, and outside, she could hear more people rushing toward the room. She was out of time. "Run," Sandra whispered, pulling at her. Emily didn't hesitate. She ran. Emily bolted through the hospital hallway, clutching her newborn against her chest. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears, drowning out the chaos behind her, shouts, alarms, the crackling of flames licking at the walls. Sandra ran beside her, gripping her daughter's arm as they sprinted past wide-eyed nurses and startled patients. "Emily, we have to get to the stairwell." Sandra gasped, glancing over her shoulder. Emily didn't dare look back. She could feel them coming, the men in dark suits, their heavy boots thudding against the linoleum floor as they pursued her. Ahead, the exit sign glowed red, signaling the stairwell's location. But as Emily and Sandra reached it, bam! The door burst open, and 2 security guards stormed out, blocking their path. "Stop right there," one of them barked, raising his hands as if to contain them. "Hand over the child, Miss Carter. No one wants to hurt you." Emily froze, pressing her baby closer to her chest. His tiny body trembled, his skin still unnaturally warm, the faint embers flickering between his lips. The guards took a step forward. Then another. Sandra's grip tightened on Emily's wrist, but before either of them could react, the baby let out a sudden, piercing wail. And the fire came again. A burst of orange flames erupted from his mouth, surging forward like a wave. One of the guards screamed, stumbling back as the fire licked at his uniform. The other barely managed to dodge, slamming himself against the wall to avoid being burned. The moment was all Emily needed. She ran. Sandra yanked open a side door, shoving her daughter inside before slamming it shut behind them. They were in a supply closet, barely big enough for the 2 of them. Emily pressed her back against the metal shelves, panting, her baby still trembling in her arms. Sandra, equally breathless, pressed her ear against the door. The footsteps outside were frantic, shouts overlapping in the hallway. "They're locking down the building," Sandra whispered. "We don't have much time." Emily swallowed hard, trying to still her shaking hands. "Mom, what the hell is happening?" she rasped. Sandra hesitated. "I don't know, baby," she admitted. "But we can't let them take him." Emily's gaze dropped to her son's tiny, wriggling form. His eyes, so bright, so unlike any baby she had ever seen, flickered with something almost unnatural. Then he cooed softly, pressing his warm face against her chest. And in that moment, he seemed just like any other baby. "Mom," Emily whispered, "why are they so afraid of him?" Before Sandra could answer, A voice rang out from beyond the door. Measured, unshaken. There's nowhere left to run, Emily. Emily's breath caught in her throat. She knew that voice. It was the man from before, the one in the black coat. The one who had appeared in the doorway just before she ran. He had followed them. Open the door, the man continued, voice unnervingly calm. You don't understand what you've just given birth to. But I do. Sandra shook her head, silent terror washing over her features. She motioned for Emily to keep quiet, but her daughter's mind was racing. Who was he? What did he know about her baby? Emily's pulse hammered in her ears. She stared at the door, at the thin sliver of light peeking beneath it. Shadows shifted, multiple figures standing just outside. They were trapped. She clenched her jaw, adjusting her grip on her child. She didn't care who this man was or what he wanted. She wasn't giving up her baby. Not now. Not ever. The door handle twisted sharply. Emily's breath hitched, and Sandra immediately braced against the door, her hands trembling. Emily, the voice behind the door murmured, calm but firm. I know you're scared, but keeping that baby with you, it's not safe. Emily's grip tightened around her newborn. His tiny body was warm, too warm. She could feel the heat radiating from his skin, but she refused to let go. Sandra's voice was low but urgent. There's a window behind you. Emily whirled, heart pounding. At the far end of the supply closet, past a stack of storage boxes, was a small, rectangular window. It was tight, too small for Sandra to fit through, but just big enough for Emily and the baby. Sandra grabbed Emily's arm, locking eyes with her. You have to go. Emily's stomach nodded. What? I'm not leaving you. Sandra cupped Emily's face, her eyes brimming with an urgency Emily had never seen before. You don't have a choice, baby. The door handle jerked violently again. Emily's baby whimpered, his tiny fingers curling into her shirt. Sandra pressed a shaking kiss to Emily's forehead, then turned and shoved the metal shelving in front of the door, barricading it. It wouldn't hold for long. Emily's chest ached, but she knew she couldn't argue. She had to save her baby. Blinking back tears, she ran for the window. She climbed onto the metal shelf beneath it, twisting her body to squeeze through. She gritted her teeth, feeling the rough edges of the window frame scrape against her skin. Her baby let out a soft, confused cry, but she cradled him close, whispering, Shoo, shoo, I got you. Crush. The door slammed open behind her. Sandra screamed, shoving at the men in suits as they forced their way inside. Emily's blood turned to ice. She locked eyes with the man in the black coat. His expression was unreadable, but his gaze was locked onto her baby. No. Sandra threw herself at him, blocking his path. Emily didn't think. She didn't breathe. She jumped. Her body plummeted from the second-story window, her stomach twisting in terror. She hit the ground hard, rolling instinctively to protect her baby from the impact. Her vision blurred from the pain that shot up her legs. But she didn't stop. She forced herself to her feet, clutching her baby and stumbling forward. Behind her, she heard the sound of Sandra struggling, furniture crashing. Then a voice barked in frustration. She's getting away. Emily ran. Emily's lungs burned as she sprinted down the darkened hospital alleyway, her baby clutched tightly against her chest. The humid night air pressed down on her, suffocating, thick with the scent of asphalt and distant rain. She didn't look back. She couldn't. The sound of rushed footsteps and shouting voices behind her sent a shockwave of panic through her limbs. They were right behind her. Men in suits. Security. Maybe even the police. Her heartbeat slammed in her chest as she weaved through a narrow gap between two parked ambulances, her body protesting from the impact of her fall. Her ankle throbbed, a sharp, stabbing pain tearing through her with every step. But she didn't slow. She couldn't. Her baby let out a soft whimper, his tiny body burning hot against her arms. She glanced down, eyes widening as she saw embers flickering between his lips again. Not now. Please, not now. Emily's mind raced. She had to find a place to hide, somewhere safe, somewhere they wouldn't find her. She spotted a row of dumpsters tucked into the side of a loading dock and veered toward them, barely avoiding a stack of medical supply crates that had been left out overnight. She dove behind the dumpsters, pressing herself against the cold brick wall, panting. Her legs screamed in pain, her lungs gasping for air. She listened. Footsteps rushed past, voices barking orders into radios. She's heading toward the east exit, block off the main street. She's on foot with the child. Emily's stomach twisted. They weren't stopping. They wouldn't stop. They wanted her baby, and she didn't even know why. Tears burned at the corners of her eyes, but she forced them back, swallowing the terror rising in her throat. She had to keep moving. She adjusted her grip on her newborn, feeling the unnatural warmth radiating from his tiny body. His eyes fluttered open, glowing faintly in the dim alleyway. For the first time, he truly looked up at her, those otherworldly irises locking onto hers. A soft, gurgling sound escaped his lips. A tiny flame flickered from his mouth. Emily sucked in a sharp breath and instinctively turned her face away from the sudden heat. But this time, it didn't burn her. The flame danced harmlessly in the air before vanishing into soft embers. Her baby cooed, a peaceful, almost satisfied sound. Emily stared. He was learning to control it. Her lips parted in disbelief, a strange mix of fear and awe settling in her chest. Who was her son? Before she could process it, the sound of engines roaring to life snapped her back to reality. A black SUV screeched onto the loading dock, its high beams cutting through the darkness. Emily's blood ran cold. They had found her. She scrambled to her feet, her legs weak, her arms cradling her child protectively. Her eyes darted to the only escape route left. A chain-link fence at the end of the alley. It was tall. Too tall. But she didn't have a choice. Emily ran. The SUV's doors slammed open, and the men from before, the ones in the suits, the ones who had chased her through the hospital, emerged, their movements swift, precise. One of them shouted, "Stop. Emily, we can help you." She pushed herself harder, her breath ragged, her arms aching from carrying her baby. She reached the fence, hands gripping the metal tightly as she hoisted herself up. Her muscles screamed in protest, the sharp ridges of the chain links cutting into her palms. She had barely pulled herself halfway up when a strong hand grabbed her ankle. Emily screamed, kicking wildly, her foot slamming into the agent's face. He grunted, staggering back, and she used the moment to climb higher, desperate. She threw her leg over the top, her baby still held close to her chest. Just as she swung the rest of her body over, a hand clamped around her wrist. She gasped, twisting to see the man in the black coat, the one who had spoken to her in the hospital, the one who knew something about her son. His grip was iron-tight, but his expression wasn't angry. It was calm, knowing. "Emily," he said, his voice eerily steady, "you can't run from this forever." Her heart pounded against her ribs. "I don't even know what this is," she shouted, trying to yank her arm free. The man exhaled slowly, then his gaze dropped to the baby in her arms. His eyes narrowed. "He's not the first." Emily froze. "What?" The man's expression remained unreadable. "Your son. He's not the first one born like this." Emily's stomach turned to ice. Before she could process his words, the baby suddenly let out a cry, louder than before. A heat wave rippled around them. The man's eyes widened. Emily barely had time to react before a blinding burst of fire exploded from her baby's mouth. It engulfed the agent's hand, searing through his sleeve. He let go. Emily fell backward, crashing onto the pavement on the other side of the fence. Pain shot up her back, but she didn't stop moving. She staggered to her feet, cradling her baby, his tiny chest rising and falling rapidly. The agents were scrambling, the man in the black coat patting down his scorched sleeve. Emily ran. She had no idea where to go. She had no idea who to trust. But she knew one thing. Her son wasn't the first. And that meant, somewhere out there, there were more like him. She had to find them. Emily ran, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps as she pushed forward into the unknown. The city streets blurred around her, neon lights casting eerie glows on the rain-slicked pavement. She had no idea where she was going, only that she had to keep moving. Her baby clutched tightly against her chest, his small body burning with unnatural warmth, his tiny whimpers barely audible over the pounding of her own heartbeat. She turned down a side street, darting into an alleyway lined with overflowing dumpsters and broken crates. The stench of rot and old grease clung to the air, but she didn't care. She needed cover. She needed time to think. Behind her, she could still hear them. The distant shouts, the static crackle of radios, the methodical thud of boots against pavement. They weren't giving up. They would chase her until she had nowhere left to run. She pressed her back against the cold brick wall, squeezing her eyes shut, willing herself to think. But how could she? Every part of her was screaming, burning with fear, exhaustion, confusion. None of this made sense. A few hours ago, she had been a normal teenage girl giving birth. Now she was running for her life, clutching a baby who could breathe fire. Her baby stirred, his tiny hand grasping at her shirt. Emily looked down, her heart twisting at the sight of him. His cheeks were flushed, his mouth slightly open, and for a moment, she feared he might unleash another burst of flames. But instead, he just gazed at her, eyes bright with something she couldn't name. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes. "What are you?" she whispered, barely able to hear her own voice. The sound of a car approaching made her head snap up. She ducked lower into the shadows, holding her breath. A sleek black vehicle rolled down the alley, its headlights sweeping across the brick walls. She clutched her baby tighter, pressing her body flat against the dumpster beside her. Her mind raced. If they found her here, she was trapped. There was no way out. The car came to a stop. The passenger door opened, and a figure stepped out. It wasn't the men in suits. It wasn't the black coat man from before. It was a woman. Emily barely dared to breathe as she took in the stranger. She was tall, dressed in dark jeans and a leather jacket, her curly hair pulled into a tight bun. She moved with a quiet confidence, her sharp eyes scanning the alley like she had been expecting something. Or someone. Emily hesitated. Could she trust her? The woman took another step forward, then stopped, her gaze landing exactly where Emily was hiding. "You can come out," the woman said, her voice calm, measured. "I know you're there." Emily's body tensed. She didn't move. The woman sighed. "Look, I don't work for them. If I did, you'd already be surrounded." She tilted her head slightly. "But if you stay here much longer, you will be. They're closing in fast." Emily swallowed hard, her fingers trembling against the baby's back. "Who are you?" she finally asked, her voice hoarse. The woman took a slow step forward. "Someone who can help you." Emily didn't trust her, but she had no other options. With one last glance down the alley, she stepped out from the shadows. The woman's gaze flickered to the baby in Emily's arms. For the briefest moment, something unreadable crossed her face. Recognition, maybe even relief. "He's strong," the woman murmured. Emily's grip tightened protectively. "I'm not giving him up." The woman's lips quirked in something that wasn't quite a smile. "Good." A noise from the far end of the alley made them both turn. Flashlights flickered in the distance. The men in suits were closing in. The woman's expression hardened. "We need to go." "No." Emily hesitated only for a second before following. The woman led her to the car, pulling open the back door. Emily climbed in, cradling her baby close. The woman slid into the driver's seat, shifting the car into gear just as a voice rang out from the alley behind them. Stop them." Tires screeched against the pavement as the car shot forward, whipping around the corner onto the main road. Emily twisted in her seat, watching through the rear window as the suited figures scrambled to follow. The woman didn't speak as she navigated through the city streets, her hands steady on the wheel. Emily's pulse still pounded in her ears. "Where are you taking us?" The woman didn't answer right away. Then, after a long pause, she said, "Somewhere safe." Emily let out a shaky breath. She wasn't sure she even knew what that meant anymore. She looked down at her baby, brushing her fingers over his tiny, too warm forehead. His breathing was soft, even. For now, at least, he was okay. But something told her this was just the beginning. The car sped through the city streets, weaving between lanes, headlights casting fleeting shadows against the buildings. Emily kept her baby pressed to her chest, her pulse racing almost as fast as the tires skidding against the pavement. The woman driving hadn't spoken again, her face set in an unreadable expression as she navigated the dimly lit roads. Emily didn't know whether to feel relief or fear. She had escaped, for now, but that didn't mean she was safe. Her grip tightened on her child, feeling his tiny chest rise and fall against her arm. His warmth seeped into her skin, unnatural, almost burning. But even as she recognized the danger of what he was, she couldn't help but hold him closer. "Where are we going?" Emily finally asked, breaking the tense silence. The woman didn't glance at her, only kept her eyes fixed on the road. "A place where they won't find you." Emily let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "Yeah? And where is that? Because it sure as hell feels like they've got eyes everywhere." The woman exhaled through her nose, her fingers flexing around the steering wheel. "They do," she admitted. "But so do we." Emily's brows furrowed. Before she could ask what that meant, the car turned onto an empty road leading toward the outskirts of the city. The buildings thinned out, replaced by dense, looming trees, their skeletal branches clawing at the night sky. She swallowed hard, shifting in her seat. "So I'm just supposed to trust you?" The woman gave a small, almost amused shake of her head. "Not. But right now, I'm the only one not trying to take your son away. So unless you have a better option..." Emily fell silent. She didn't have a better option. The woman drove in silence for several more minutes, the car's tires crunching over gravel as they veered off the main road onto a winding path. The headlights illuminated a small, secluded house at the end of the road, surrounded by thick forest. It looked abandoned, weathered, cracked paint, a porch sagging slightly under its own weight. Emily's stomach twisted. This was supposed to be safe? The woman pulled the car to a stop, cutting the engine. The silence that followed felt deafening after the adrenaline-fueled escape. Emily hesitated. "What is this place?" "A safe house," the woman said simply, stepping out of the car. She glanced back at Emily through the open door. "Come on. We don't have much time." Emily's arms tightened around her baby as she reluctantly climbed out, her legs aching, still sore from running. The woman led her up the porch steps, pushing open the door without hesitation. Inside, the air smelled of old wood and dust, but the place was lived in. There were books stacked against the walls, a fire pit in the center of the room, flickering embers barely holding on to life. Emily stepped inside cautiously, her baby stirring slightly in her arms. The woman closed the door behind them, locking it before flipping a switch on the wall. The dim glow of warm, golden light filled the space. Emily turned, her mind racing with questions. "Who are you?" The woman exhaled, rubbing the back of her neck. "My name's Mara." Emily took a slow step back. "And why are you helping me?" Mara studied her for a long moment. Then she glanced at the baby in Emily's arms. "Because he's not the only one." Emily's breath caught. "What do you mean?" she whispered. Mara's expression darkened slightly. "Your son, he's special. But he's not the first. And if they get their hands on him, he won't be the last." Emily's fingers tightened around her baby. "They called him Project Phoenix at the hospital," she murmured. "They acted like they were expecting him." Mara nodded grimly. "They were... because they've been trying to create something like him for a long time." Emily's stomach churned. Her baby whimpered, shifting against her chest, and for a moment, the temperature in the room seemed to rise. Emily instinctively rocked him, whispering softly until he settled again. Mara watched them carefully. "They won't stop coming for him," Mara said. "Not until they have what they want." Emily's mouth went dry. "And what do they want?" Mara hesitated. Then her gaze flickered back to Emily, something steeled in her expression. "They want his fire." Emily felt her knees go weak. She staggered slightly, gripping the back of an old wooden chair to keep herself upright. Her baby shifted in her arms, his tiny fingers curling against the fabric of her shirt. "They want his fire?" she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. Mara nodded, stepping forward. "They've been experimenting for years. Genetic modifications, forced mutations, selective breeding programs, all to create something like him. Something powerful. But until now, every attempt has failed." Emily swallowed hard. "Until now?" Mara's gaze darkened. "Your son is the first successful one. A cold chill ran down Emily's spine, despite the warmth radiating from her child's body. She stared at Mara, searching for some sign that she was lying. But the woman's expression remained firm, steady, too steady. You knew about this, Emily realized, her voice shaking. You knew something like this could happen. Mara didn't deny it. I knew it was only a matter of time before they got it right. Emily's breath hitched. She turned her gaze down to the baby in her arms. He looked so small, so innocent. But he wasn't just a baby. Not to them. To them, he was an experiment. A breakthrough. A weapon. Her grip tightened protectively. I won't let them take him, she said, her voice hard. Mara nodded. That's why I'm here. Emily's mind reeled. None of this made sense. She was just a normal girl. Or at least she had been until today. Now she was a fugitive, running from people who wanted to take her child and turn him into, what? Some kind of lab rat? Some kind of soldier? She shook her head. Why him? Why me? Mara hesitated. Because of your father. Emily's blood ran cold. She blinked. What? Mara exhaled, leaning against the worn-out table in the middle of the room. Your father was part of the original program. He was one of the first test subjects. Emily took a step back, gripping the baby closer to her chest. No, that's not possible. My father left when I was a kid. He wasn't some government experiment. Mara met her eyes. He didn't leave, Emily. He ran. Emily's breath caught. No, she said again, shaking her head. You're lying. Mara sighed, rubbing a hand over her face. I wish I was. But you needed to know the truth. Emily felt like the world was tilting around her. Her father had left them. She had spent years hating him for it. And now this stranger was telling her he hadn't just walked out. He had been running from the same people who were after her now? It was too much. She pressed a shaking hand to her forehead, willing herself to breathe. Her baby stirred again, a faint warmth rising between them. Mara took a cautious step forward. Emily, I know this is a lot, but you don't have time to process it. They're still looking for you. And now that you're off their radar, you need to decide, are you going to keep running? Emily's pulse pounded in her ears. Her son let out a soft sound, a flicker of golden embers escaping his lips. She swallowed hard. No, she whispered. I'm not running anymore. Mara studied Emily's face for a moment, as if measuring the resolve in her words. The dim glow of the fire in the hearth flickered, casting long shadows along the walls of the safe house. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, rustling branches like distant whispers. Emily's chest rose and fell rapidly as she tried to steady her breathing. Her son whimpered softly in her arms, his warmth seeping into her skin like a low-burning ember. She pressed her lips against his forehead, whispering, I've got you, baby. I won't let them take you. Mara sighed, running a hand through her dark curls. If you're serious about not running anymore, then you have to be ready for what that means. Emily looked up at her, eyes hard. And what does that mean? Mara's expression darkened. It means fighting back. Emily's stomach twisted, but she forced herself to stand tall. How? Mara motioned for her to sit at the wooden table. Emily hesitated before lowering herself onto the worn-out chair, careful not to jostle her baby. Mara sat across from her, resting her elbows on the surface. There's an underground network, Mara said. People like me, people who have been fighting against these experiments for years. We've been trying to stop them from creating something like your son. But now that he's here, they'll do whatever it takes to get him. Emily's fingers curled around the edge of the table. What do they even want him for? Just because he can breathe fire? Mara shook her head. It's not just that. It's what he represents. Power. Evolution. They think he's the key to creating a new generation of enhanced humans. Soldiers. Weapons. Emily's jaw clenched. He's not a weapon. He's a baby. Mara nodded. I know. But they don't see it that way. A heavy silence settled between them. The only sound was the quiet crackle of the fire and the baby's steady breathing. Emily's mind raced. She had spent the last few hours running, terrified, not knowing who to trust. But now, hearing all of this, she realized she had never had a choice. The moment her son was born, her fate had been sealed. Running wouldn't be enough. Hiding wouldn't be enough. She had to fight. Taking a deep breath, she looked at Mara. "What do we do?" Mara's lips curved slightly, as if she had been waiting for those words. "First, we need to get you somewhere safer. This place is only a temporary stop. They'll figure out where you are soon." Emily nodded, glancing down at her son. "Where do we go?" Mara stood, walking over to a dusty cabinet. She pulled open a drawer and retrieved a map, unfolding it across the table. "There's a secure location about 200 miles north," she said, pointing to a spot deep within the mountains. "It's where we regroup, where others like us are hiding." Emily traced the route with her eyes. "And once we get there?" Mara met her gaze. "Then we train. We prepare." Emily swallowed. She had never imagined a life like this. She had never thought she would be running from the government, training for a fight she never asked for. But now, looking down at her child, feeling the unnatural heat radiating from his tiny body, she knew there was no other path. She looked back up at Mara, her expression fierce. "Then let's go." Mara nodded, folding the map. "We leave at first light." Emily leaned back in the chair, exhaustion pulling at her limbs. But even as the fear and uncertainty weighed on her, a new feeling burned beneath the surface. Determination. For the first time since this nightmare began, she felt like she had control. And she wasn't going to let them take that away from her. The night passed in restless silence. Emily sat awake in the dim light of the safe house, watching the slow rise and fall of her baby's chest. His warmth was constant, like a small furnace pressed against her body, a reminder of what she was fighting for. She had never felt so much love and fear at the same time. Mara was already moving before dawn, packing supplies into a large duffel bag. Cans of food, blankets, a first aid kit, extra clothes, everything they would need for the long journey ahead. Emily sat on the worn-out couch, her arms wrapped protectively around her child. "You sure about this?" Mara asked without turning around. Emily met her gaze. "I don't have a choice." Mara gave a short nod. "Good answer." By the time the sun began to creep over the horizon, they were ready. Emily bundled her son in a thick blanket, shielding him from the early morning chill. The air was crisp, the scent of damp earth filling her lungs as they stepped outside. Mara's car was parked at the edge of the clearing, hidden under a tangle of overgrown branches. Emily hesitated for a moment, looking back at the small, abandoned house that had given them a few hours of safety. It felt like the beginning of something new. A moment where her old life, the normal one, was truly gone. She took a deep breath and climbed into the car. Mara started the engine, guiding them onto the winding forest road. The ride was quiet at first, just the hum of the tires against the uneven dirt path. Emily kept her baby close, watching the trees blur past through the window. "How do you know they won't find us?" she finally asked. Mara exhaled, gripping the wheel. "I don't. But they're expecting you to run blind, not with help. That gives us an advantage, for now." Emily nodded slowly. She wasn't used to trusting people, but she had no choice. Mara had saved her life. That had to count for something. Hours passed, the city disappearing into the distance. They stopped once at an abandoned gas station, where Mara filled up the car with fuel siphoned from an old pump. Emily rocked her baby in the front seat, humming softly as he stirred. His tiny face was peaceful, his breathing even. But there was something else. A faint flicker of heat pulsed against Emily's fingertips, subtle, but there. She pulled the blanket back slightly, just enough to see his mouth twitch in his sleep, followed by the softest curl of smoke escaping his lips. Her stomach tightened. "He's getting stronger," she murmured. Mara glanced over as she slid back into the driver's seat. "Yeah, he's..." Emily swallowed hard, tucking the blanket back into place. "What if I can't control it? What if..." "You will." Mara cut her off. "Because you have to?" Emily turned her gaze back to the road ahead. The mountains loomed in the distance, their peaks kissed by the morning light. They were heading straight into the unknown. But for the first time, she wasn't running. She was fighting. For herself. For her son. For whatever came next.